When my sister laughed at the cheap candle I brought to her engagement dinner, everyone else laughed too, including our mother. Then she opened the card tucked beneath the ribbon, and the room went so quiet, I heard my father drop his fork. Her smile vanished first. My mother turned pale second. By the time my future brother-in-law asked what was wrong, I finally understood why they had spent 15 years calling me ungrateful, difficult, dramatic, and impossible to love. That card changed everything that night. Before we go further, tell me where you are watching from, because stories like this always seem to find the people who have smiled through family humiliation and remembered every detail. If you know what it feels like to be underestimated until the truth finally walks into the room, stay with me. My name is Elena Ward, and by the night of my sister Piper's engagement dinner, I had already spent most of my adult life being treated like the extra chair nobody wanted, but everybody used. I was born in Columbus, raised in a house where charm mattered more than character, and where my younger sister somehow learned early that if she smiled at the right moment, she could turn cruelty into entertainment. Piper had always been the golden girl. She was loud in the way people call magnetic careless, in the way people call free-spirited and selfish, in the way my mother called misunderstood. I was the practical one, which in our family meant I was useful when bills were due, and invisible when praise was being handed out. By the time I was old enough to understand patterns, I had already become one. If Piper forgot her lunch, my mother blamed me for not checking. If Piper got caught lying, my father said I should stop provoking her. If Piper wanted something expensive, my parents found a reason she deserved it. If I wanted anything at all, I was told to be patient, grateful, humble, realistic, less emotional, less difficult, less me. That kind of conditioning does something dangerous. It does not only teach you to expect mistreatment, it teaches everyone around you that your silence is a resource. I left home at 18 with a scholarship, a part-time job, and a private promise that I would never need them again. I kept that promise better than they knew. I built a career in financial compliance, the kind of work people only notice when something is wrong. I was good at it because I had grown up in a house where every smile came with hidden math. I learned how money moves when people are hiding shame, greed, panic, and entitlement behind pleasant voices. I bought my condo alone. I paid off my student loans early. I kept clean records, strong credit, and enough distance from my family to protect my peace. Or at least I thought I did. Then, 6 weeks before Piper's engagement dinner, my phone lit up during a meeting with an alert from my bank. A transfer request had been initiated using my name on a dormant estate account I had not touched in years. The account had belonged to my grandmother, Ruth Ward. She died when I was 24, leaving behind something my family liked to describe as sentimental but modest. That was not true. Grandma Ruth had never been flashy, but she was disciplined. She left behind a townhouse she had sold before her death, a portfolio of conservative investments, and a set of instructions that split the remainder equally between me and Piper once certain tax obligations cleared. There was also a smaller reserve fund meant for emergency family medical expenses, but that reserve required dual authorization from the estate attorney and both beneficiaries. I knew that because I was the only person in the family who ever read legal documents before signing them. The transfer request had not come from me. At first, I assumed clerical error. That assumption lasted exactly 14 minutes. I stepped out of the meeting, called the estate bank, verified my identity, and asked the fraud department to read every recent action on the account. The woman on the line hesitated in the careful way trained employees do when they realize the caller is calm enough to become dangerous. There had been multiple withdrawals over the previous 8 months. Large ones, then smaller ones, then a series of linked transactions routed through a wedding planning firm, a floral wholesaler, a luxury venue deposit service, and an event styling company, registered under a brand name I knew immediately because Piper had posted it all over social media. Piper Ever After, her wedding aesthetic, her custom logo, her fake little empire built on blush pink mood boards and expensive lies. I remember standing in the hallway outside the conference room with my hand pressed so hard against the wall that my fingers went numb. I asked the bank representative to repeat everything. She did. Then I asked for the authorization file. The first forged document used a digital signature that looked close enough to mine to fool a lazy clerk. The second included an emergency justification claiming my mother needed cardiac treatment not covered by insurance. The third was worse. It attached a notarized declaration that I had verbally surrendered my share of the estate years earlier because I wanted Piper to use the funds to start a family business. I did not breathe for several seconds after hearing that. Not because it shocked me, because it fit them perfectly. The fraud department froze the account. I called the estate attorney Martin Hale, who had known my grandmother for decades and still spoke about her like she had simply stepped into another room. He pulled the archived files, reviewed the recent submissions, and called me back within the hour. His voice had lost all softness. Elena, he said, the notary stamp on the surrender declaration is false. That was the moment the situation stopped being ugly and became criminal. I took the rest of the day off and drove straight to Martin's office. He had already spread copies across the conference table. The forged signature was bad but not amateurish. Whoever did it had access to old documents. My address was wrong on one form, correct on another. My mother's supposed medical records were attached in partial scans that cut off identifying metadata. One transfer memo described the disbursements as estate balancing. Another described them as shared inheritance restructuring. The language was clumsy but confident, like someone thought no one would ever challenge it. Martin turned another page and found the worst line of all. Collateral reference. I stared at it. Then I stared harder. One of the loan packets associated with Piper's event company listed my condo as supporting collateral against a short-term private line of credit. I laughed. I actually laughed because sometimes the body chooses disbelief before grief. That could not happen. My home was in my name alone. Nobody had access. Martin did not laugh. He asked if I had ever given anyone copies of personal documents. Not recently, I said. Then memory pulled something rotten from years earlier. When I first bought the condo, my mother insisted on keeping copies of my closing paperwork in case of emergency. She said it was what families did. At the time, I still believed in occasional gestures of trust. I had also once let my father collect mail while I was traveling for work. That was before I installed a locked box. Martin's expression told me what he already suspected. My family had not merely drained inheritance money. They had used archived personal documents to create the illusion that I had consented to support their debt. There are betrayals that arrive like thunder. This one arrived like an audit, itemized, sequential, cold. The next 2 weeks became a blur of calls, records, requests, and legal containment. I requested copies of every transfer, every vendor invoice, every loan communication, every notary log, every email that mentioned my name. I pulled title records. I checked my credit file. There it was, a hard inquiry connected to a regional private lender I had never contacted. Then another. Then a conditional filing draft that had not yet completed because a final supporting document was missing. That missing document was probably the only reason I still owned my home without a fight. Piper and my mother had gotten greedy before they got thorough. The more I dug, the uglier it got. The floral wholesaler belonged to a college friend of Piper's who had been billing double market rate. The event styling company was registered to a mailbox and had no employees besides Piper. My mother had transferred smaller amounts into her personal account, then into Piper's vendor account, then out again in round numbers that made the laundering almost insulting. My father was not listed on the paperwork, but several emails showed him forwarding bank notices to my mother with lines like, "Handle this before Elena notices, and she never checks family matters anyway." That line hurt more than I expected, because I had checked. For years I had checked. I had quietly paid property taxes on my parents' house when Dad's hardware store had a bad year. I had covered one of Piper's credit card minimums during what my mother called a temporary rough patch. I had sent grocery deliveries during winter storms. I had paid without theatrics, without posting about generosity, without asking for gratitude, because some stubborn part of me still wanted to be the daughter who loved harder than she was loved. Meanwhile, they were stealing from me with both hands. The family response when I first approached them carefully was textbook. Deny, minimize, attack. I invited my mother to coffee before involving anyone else, thinking maybe fear would crack honesty loose. It did not. She came in wearing cream wool and entitlement, sat down across from me, and smiled like we were discussing floral arrangements. When I showed her the transaction summary, she did not look ashamed. She looked irritated. "It was temporary," she said. "Your sister needed help. You are doing well. This is what family does." I asked whether family also forges signatures and falsifies medical records. Her jaw tightened. Do not use ugly words when you do not understand the whole picture. I understood it perfectly. Then she said the sentence that burned away any remaining softness in me. You have always been dramatic about money because you do not have children, Elena. Piper is building a future. As if I were not. As if my life counted less because it was not decorated in peonies and bridal silk. As if stealing from me was an act of maternal vision. My father would not meet privately. Piper sent a voice note instead. She was laughing in the background of what sounded like a tasting appointment. You are really going to make a scene over paperwork? She asked. Grandma would have wanted us to use it for something joyful. That was Piper, theft with a slogan. I did not answer her. Instead, I did what they had always mocked me for doing. I got meticulous. Martin prepared a formal notice. The bank opened a fraud investigation. The lender froze the incomplete collateral process when they realized the authorizations were under dispute. I also hired a forensic accountant outside my own employer because I needed someone who could testify without conflict if this escalated. It escalated by the following Tuesday. The accountant Naomi Brooks called me with 3 words that made my pulse steady instead of race. It is wider. The estate money was only one layer. There were additional transfers from an old custodial account my grandmother had opened in my name as a child. A municipal bond liquidation had been redirected. There were traces of a life insurance disbursement intended to cover both granddaughters equally. Even worse, Piper had been telling vendors that my sister handles the numbers whenever payment delays surfaced using my name as credibility while emptying accounts behind my back. I was not just the victim, I was the mask. That night, staring at the compiled folder on my kitchen table, I understood something that changed the way I saw the coming confrontation. They did not think they could convince me. They thought they could shame me into silence. They thought years of contempt had trained me for exactly this moment. They thought I would choose private pain over public truth because that is what I had always done before. That is when I bought the candle. Small, white, clean glass. Gardenia and cedar, my grandmother's favorite scent. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic, just enough for Piper to underestimate. Then I handwrote the card. I did not put all the evidence inside. Just enough to turn her face white before dessert. Just enough to tell her that the bank manager, estate attorney, and lender representative would be arriving at the restaurant's private room 10 minutes after she read it. Just enough to let her know that if she wanted dignity, she had already spent it. I chose my words carefully. Piper, since you enjoy opening things that do not belong to you, I thought I would return the tradition. Read the attached summary before you smile for photos. The inheritance withdrawals, the forged surrender letter, the false medical claim, and the attempted lien against my home are now under review. Mr. Hale, the bank fraud officer, and the lender's counsel will join us shortly. Do not cry and call it misunderstanding tonight. Use the time to decide whether you want to explain this before Grant hears it from them. I signed only my first name. No hearts. No congratulations. No warning beyond the truth itself. And on the night of the engagement dinner, when Piper rolled her eyes at my small gift, she still thought she was the main character. She did not know the card inside was a door locking behind her. Piper chose a private dining room at a restored hotel downtown, the kind of place designed to make people feel richer and kinder than they are. Candlelight on polished brass, cream linen, tall windows reflecting everyone back at themselves in soft gold. My mother loved rooms like that because they blurred the line between elegance and performance. I arrived 10 minutes early in a navy dress I had owned for years, carrying the gardenia candle in a white gift bag with tissue paper so ordinary it almost looked apologetic. That made Piper smile when she saw it. There were already 14 people in the room. My parents. Grant, her fiancé, a commercial developer with a polished smile and eyes that always looked like they were reading fine print. Grant's parents, who had more money than taste. 2 of Piper's bridesmaids, both dressed in matching shades of artificial loyalty. A cousin from my mother's side, who never missed live drama. And a few close friends from Grant's office. Piper crossed the room in satin and diamonds, air-kissing everyone, then stopped in front of me and glanced down at the bag. That is adorable, she said loud enough for the room. You really do not have to do the tiny symbolic gift thing with me. A few people laughed. My mother gave me the look she had perfected over decades. Pleasant on the surface, corrective underneath. Do not embarrass us, Elena. Know your role. I smiled back at Piper. It is small, I said, but I thought you should open it tonight. That line should have warned her. Instead, she grinned and set the bag near the champagne. Dinner unfolded with the usual choreography of selective affection. Piper told stories that made her sound breezy and beloved. My father toasted Grant for joining a warm, loyal family, which nearly made me choke on my water. My mother praised Piper's resilience, creativity, and generous heart, every phrase more painful, because she believed at least some of it while saying it. When Grant's mother asked what I did for work, Piper answered before I could. Elena investigates paperwork for a living, she said, which is why we keep her away from romance. Another round of laughter. I looked directly at Grant when I answered. I work in financial compliance. I notice patterns most people hope stay buried. He smiled politely, but his eyes flicked toward Piper for just a second too long. Interesting. By the time entrees were cleared, the gift pile had become part of the entertainment. Piper loved opening presents in front of people because she believed every object confirmed her importance. There were crystal flutes, framed engagement sketches, a weekend spa package, monogrammed linens, and an absurdly large serving bowl that Grant's mother described as heirloom quality with the seriousness of national policy. Then Piper reached my bag. She lifted the candle by 2 fingers and laughed. A candle, she said, from Elena. Somehow that feels aggressively on brand. My cousin snorted. One bridesmaid covered her mouth. My father did nothing. I watched Piper peel back the ribbon, still smiling for her audience. Then she noticed the envelope tucked beneath the bow. For the bride, she read aloud with a smirk. Open it, I thought. Please open it exactly like this. She did. At first, her expression barely shifted. Her eyes moved left to right. She looked annoyed, then confused. Then she pulled the folded summary pages from the envelope and saw the header from Martin's office. That was when color left her face. What is that? Grant asked lightly. Piper did not answer. My mother leaned closer, probably expecting some sentimental note she could weaponize into a story about reconciliation. Instead, she read the first page over Piper's shoulder and physically recoiled. It was subtle, but I saw it. So did Grant. My father set down his fork too hard. The metal struck porcelain. The sound cut through the room. What is going on? Grant's father asked. Piper finally looked at me, and for the first time in our entire lives, she looked small. Elena, she whispered, what did you do? I almost laughed at the wording. Not what is this, not why is this here, but what did you do? I folded my hands in my lap. I brought documentation, I said. You should keep reading. My mother found her voice first. This is not the time. No, I said calmly. The time was months ago, before forged signatures, false medical claims, and estate theft. The room stopped breathing. Grant sat back slowly. Estate theft. Piper tried to shove the papers back into the envelope, but his hand closed over them first. Give me that, she hissed. He did not. He stood, stepped away from her, and skimmed the first page in silence. His forehead tightened. Then he turned to page 2, where Naomi's preliminary tracing summary outlined the withdrawals into Piper's vendor accounts. This is some kind of mistake, Piper said quickly. Elena always twists things. She is obsessed with making me look bad. Grant did not look up. Why does your event account appear here? My mother rose halfway out of her chair. We are not doing this in front of everyone. I finally leaned forward. You already did it in front of everyone, I said. You did it when you used my name, my inheritance, and my property documents to pay for this performance. Grant's mother pressed a hand to her necklace. One of the bridesmaids stared at Piper, like she had just discovered mold under expensive paint. My father tried the old tactic, next authority. Elena, enough. I turned to him. Did you forward payment warnings to Mom and tell her to handle them before I noticed? His mouth opened and closed. That was answer enough. Piper's voice sharpened into panic. You are insane. Grandma would have wanted me to have support. Half, I said. She wanted you to have half. Not all. Not mine. Not my childhood account. Not a fraudulent emergency reserve release. Not a fabricated surrender letter. And certainly not my condo as collateral. Grant looked up so fast his chair nearly scraped backward. My condo. I repeated louder now for the whole table. They tried to attach my home to a private line of credit tied to your wedding expenses. Now the room truly broke. Grant's father swore under his breath. His mother demanded to know whether their family name had been attached to fraudulent financing. My cousin, useless in every other emergency, suddenly became very interested in her phone. Piper burst into tears so fast it would have impressed me if I had not seen the maneuver since childhood. "She hates me," Piper cried. "She has always hated me because people actually love me." That line might have worked once. It did not work in a room with paper. I reached into my bag and placed a second envelope on the table. This one I slid toward Grant. "Read the email extracts," I said. "Especially the ones where she tells vendors I handle the numbers and where my mother refers to me as backup security in case your contribution falls short." Grant stared at me. "You brought more." "I brought enough." He opened the second envelope. My mother lunged for it, but Grant stepped away before she could grab it. His face changed as he read. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just slowly enough to be real. "Piper," he said, each word clipped clean. "Why is there an invoice here for a floral deposit paid from an account labeled Ruth Ward Estate?" Piper was crying too hard to answer. Grant looked at my mother next. "And why is there an email from you saying Elena does not need to know because she is used to sacrificing for family?" My mother sat down like her knees had stopped cooperating. That was when the private dining room door opened. Martin Hale walked in first, briefcase in hand, his silver hair neat as ever. Behind him came a woman from the bank's fraud division and counsel from the private lender. I had warned the restaurant manager in advance. No scene, no raised voices, just admission to the private room at the scheduled time. Piper made a sound I can only describe as the collapse of entitlement. "You brought them here," she said. "No," I answered. "You brought them here when you signed my name." Martin's voice was calm, formal, devastating. "Good evening. I apologize for the intrusion. Due to disputed estate disbursements and supporting documentation submitted under potentially fraudulent authority, we need to clarify the status of certain financial representations immediately." Grant actually laughed once without humor. "At my engagement dinner," he said. Martin did not soften. Fraud is rarely convenient. The bank officer identified the flagged transfers. The lender's counsel confirmed that an incomplete credit structure linked to Piper's business had referenced property belonging solely to me. Grant's father demanded names, dates, liabilities. My father kept trying to interrupt, but every interruption made him look guiltier. My mother shifted between outrage and self-pity so quickly it was almost athletic. Then came the question that detonated what little image Piper had left. Grant looked directly at her and said, "Did you know this was stolen? Not misunderstood, not complicated, stolen." Piper opened her mouth, glanced at our mother, then at me, then at the documents in Grant's hand. Her answer arrived not in words, but in delay. And delay is confession wearing makeup. Finally, she said, "Mom told me Elena would never need it the way I do." Grant closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, he looked at her like a contractor evaluating structural damage. The room had no center anymore. It only had fault lines. My mother started pleading then, but even her pleading was shaped like accusation. She spoke about pressure appearances, wedding costs, expectations, fairness, how much Piper had been through, how I had always been strong, how families redistribute burdens. Every sentence revealed more contempt for me than remorse for what they had done. I let her talk. Sometimes exposure works best when you do not interrupt. By the time she finished, Grant had removed his engagement ring and set it beside Piper's untouched champagne glass. Nobody gasped. It was past gasping. It was the logical next sound in a room where lies had finally run out of charm. And that was the moment I realized the card inside my small gift had done exactly what I wanted. It had not humiliated Piper. It had forced everyone else to stop participating in the lie. The room did not recover after Grant set the engagement ring beside Piper's glass. It did not need to. Some moments end a story even while everyone is still sitting at the table. Piper stared at the ring like it had betrayed her personally. My mother leaned toward Grant with a voice that tried to sound reasonable but carried the sharp edge of desperation. "You are reacting emotionally," she said. "There are explanations for everything you just heard." Grant did not look at her. He was still looking at Piper. "You told me the business was funded by family support," he said slowly. "It was," Piper answered quickly. "Grandma left money for both of us." Grant lifted the page with Naomi's tracing report. "This says you transferred funds through 3 separate accounts to hide the origin of the money. That is not support. That is concealment." My father finally pushed his chair back and stood. "This is ridiculous," he said. "We are not criminals. This is a misunderstanding blown out of proportion." Martin Hale closed his briefcase gently. and looked at my father with the patience of someone who had spent 40 years watching people realize consequences were real. A misunderstanding does not produce forged signatures, Mr. Ward Martin said. The bank officer spoke next, her voice crisp. The estate withdrawals were submitted with falsified authorization. That qualifies as fraud regardless of family relationship. My mother turned to me then, not apologetic, furious. You planned this, she said quietly. Yes, I answered. Her eyes hardened. You waited for her engagement dinner. Yes. She laughed bitterly. You always were vindictive. I almost felt tired hearing that word again. No, I said calmly, I was patient. Grant's father leaned forward at that point, folding his hands on the table. I would like to understand the liability exposure, he said to the lender's counsel. The lawyer nodded. The attempted collateralization of Ms. Ward's property was incomplete, so the lien was never finalized. However, the submission of fraudulent documentation could still constitute attempted financial misrepresentation. Grant's mother whispered something under her breath that sounded very much like unbelievable. Piper suddenly stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. This is insane, she said loudly. You are all acting like I robbed a bank. I looked at her. You robbed your sister. The room went silent again. Grant spoke carefully. Did you know the signature was forged? Piper hesitated. My mother answered for her. She trusted us. Grant turned slowly toward her. That is not the defense you think it is. For the next 20 minutes, the room became something halfway between a legal consultation and a family autopsy. Martin outlined the estate violations. The bank officer explained the transfer trails. The lender's counsel confirmed that the attempted loan structure would trigger investigation if it had proceeded. My father stopped arguing once the language shifted from accusation to documentation. Facts are very hard to shout over. At one point, Grant looked at me and asked the question nobody else had thought to ask. Why did you not file charges immediately? I considered the answer carefully. Because I wanted them to hear the truth in the same room where they celebrated what they bought with it. He nodded once, not approval, understanding. Across the table, Piper had stopped crying. She had entered the colder stage of panic where anger replaces fear. You have ruined my life, she said to me. No, I replied. Your paperwork did that. Grant slid the documents back into the envelope. I need space to review everything, he said. Then he looked directly at my mother and father. And I will need assurance that my family has no exposure tied to this situation. My father said nothing. My mother looked like she had swallowed broken glass. The dinner ended without dessert. Guests left quietly, avoiding eye contact with Piper. Grant walked out alone. His parents followed him, speaking in low voices about legal counsel and reputation. The bridesmaids disappeared faster than spilled champagne. Eventually, the room held only 4 people. My parents, my sister, and me. Piper was the first to speak. You could have handled this privately. I tried. You embarrassed us. You embarrassed yourselves. My father rubbed his temples. What do you want, Elena? The question hung in the air. For years, I had wanted their respect. For years, I had wanted fairness. But that night, the answer was simpler. I want the money returned, I said. Every dollar. I want the forged declarations withdrawn and formally corrected. I want written acknowledgments submitted to the estate attorney and the bank. My mother shook her head. You are destroying this family. I looked around the empty room. It was already destroyed? I'm just documenting the damage. That conversation ended without resolution. But it was not the end of the story. Because within 3 days, the consequences began spreading outward like cracks in glass. Grant canceled the wedding venue reservation. Vendors started calling Piper for payment confirmation. The lender initiated an internal review, and the estate bank opened a full fraud case. For the first time in our lives, my family had to deal with something stronger than reputation. Evidence. But even then, I still believed the truth alone would be enough. I was wrong, because betrayal had not finished revealing itself yet. 3 weeks after the engagement dinner, I learned something that nearly collapsed everything I had built. The call came from Naomi Brooks. Her voice was cautious. Elena, she said, we need to discuss one more layer of the financial trail. My stomach tightened. What layer? There is a payment authorization attached to the original estate withdrawal. I frowned. That authorization was forged. Yes, she said carefully. But the document contains a witness signature. My chest felt suddenly hollow. What witness? There was a pause. Your friend. The word landed like a stone. Which friend? I asked slowly. Naomi answered. Derek. For a moment, I did not understand. Derek Sullivan had been one of the only people outside my work life who knew the entire situation. He had been my closest friend for nearly 8 years. We met through a volunteer financial literacy program and stayed in touch long after the program ended. When the fraud investigation began, he was the person who listened when I needed to talk without feeling judged. He had also helped me gather some of the documentation before the dinner. "Show me the file," I said quietly. Naomi emailed it within minutes. The scanned page appeared on my screen. Witness verification. Derek Sullivan. My hands went cold. The signature looked real. Too real. I called him immediately. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said warmly. "How are you holding up?" I skipped the greeting. "Did you sign a document connected to my grandmother's estate?" Silence. Then Derek exhaled slowly. "Elena." That was when I knew. "Yes or no," I said. "Yes." The word felt like the floor had tilted under my chair. "Why?" "I thought it was authorization paperwork," he said quickly. "Your mother told me you had already agreed." I closed my eyes. "You did not ask me. She said you were overwhelmed and needed help processing it." I pressed my hand against my forehead. Derek continued, speaking faster now. "Elena, it was months ago. I did not know what it was tied to. Did you read it?" I skimmed it. The anger arrived slowly. "You witnessed a financial declaration involving my inheritance without confirming it with me. I trusted your family." The irony nearly made me laugh. "So did I said quietly. Derek tried to explain. He said my mother had called him after finding his number in an old contact list. She told him I was handling estate restructuring and needed a witness signature to finalize the transfer quickly. She framed it as administrative inconvenience. He believed her. And because Derek believed her, the forged declaration gained legitimacy long enough for the bank clerk to process the first withdrawal. "I never imagined they would do something like this," he said. Neither had he imagined the damage. The investigation now included him as a potential facilitator. Not criminally responsible perhaps, but involved. For the first time since the dinner, I felt something close to defeat. The case had been clean. Now it was messy. Emotionally messy. Legally complicated. When I hung up the phone, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the same gardenia candle I had never lit. Trust, I realized, is not destroyed only by enemies. Sometimes it collapses under the weight of good intentions. But Derek's mistake created an opening my family immediately tried to exploit. Within days, their attorney contacted Martin with a new argument. If a neutral witness verified the authorization they claimed, then the withdrawal had been legitimate at the time. It was not a strong argument, but it was enough to slow the process. For the first time since confronting them, I felt like the ground beneath the case had shifted. The truth was still on my side, but the clarity had blurred, and my family knew it. My mother called 2 days later. Her voice sounded almost sympathetic. "You see how complicated things become when accusations start flying," she said. I did not answer. "You should let this go," she continued softly. "Families survive mistakes by forgiving them." Forgiving them. The word echoed like an insult. I finally spoke. "You forged my signature." "You have Derek's signature," she replied calmly. The call ended soon after. For the first time since the engagement dinner, I wondered if exposing them had actually strengthened their defense. Because betrayal inside the alliance network hurts more than opposition outside it. But the story was not finished. Because the same mistake that weakened my case also revealed something else. A detail nobody had noticed yet. And that detail would change everything. If you want the final twist and how the truth ultimately secured justice, tell me, and I will continue with part 6 and part 7, where the hidden evidence appears, the final confrontation unfolds, and the story reaches its full resolution. Part 6 và by SEO YouTube description. 165 words và 5 thế tag, chữ thượng hài hoặc 3 từ. The night after Derek admitted he had signed the witness declaration, I barely slept. Not because I doubted the truth, but because the truth had suddenly become tangled. Evidence had always been my advantage. I trusted documents, timelines, digital trails, the quiet language of records that never needed emotion to prove their meaning. Yet now one careless signature had allowed my mother to pretend the entire fraud might be a misunderstanding. For several days, the case stalled. Martin Hale remained confident but careful. "The core violation still stands," he told me during a call from his office. "Forging your signature and falsifying a medical emergency remain serious offenses. But your mother's attorney will now argue implied consent." Implied consent, a phrase built to hide intention. The investigation paused while the bank's legal department reviewed Derek's involvement. The lender also suspended their internal inquiry, waiting for clarification before determining whether the attempted collateral filing constituted deliberate deception or administrative confusion. My mother immediately used the delay as leverage. She began calling relatives. She described the situation as a misunderstanding between sisters. She implied that I had exaggerated things because I disliked Piper's fiancé. She suggested the estate paperwork had always been complicated and that I had become emotionally unstable after the engagement dinner. For years, she had shaped narratives about me. Now she simply returned to the familiar strategy. Paint me as dramatic. Paint Piper as misunderstood. Paint herself as a mother trying to hold the family together. Normally that strategy worked, but something had changed, because this time there were documents. Still, the delay bothered me. Not because I feared losing the case, but because I hated unfinished truth. 3 nights after Derek's call, Naomi Brooks requested another meeting. When I arrived at her office, she had 2 laptops open and several printed ledgers spread across the table. I found something strange, she said. Naomi had been tracing the money trail again, this time focusing not on the estate withdrawals, but on the vendor payments Piper had made afterward. Most of those payments went to wedding vendors. But one series of transfers did not match the pattern. They went to an account labeled Magnolia Consulting Services. The amounts were smaller but frequent. I leaned closer. That is not a wedding vendor. No, Naomi said. It is registered as a marketing advisory firm. She pulled up the business registration. The owner's name appeared. Grant Whitaker. Grant's middle name. His fiance's ex-fiance. My breath caught for a moment. Grant had broken the engagement the night of the dinner. But apparently before that night, he had already been receiving money from Piper's accounts. Naomi opened another file. These payments began months before the engagement dinner, she said. How many months? Nearly a year. A year. That meant the money Piper stole had not only funded the wedding, it had also funded Grant. Suddenly, the entire situation shifted. Did Grant know where the money came from? I asked. Naomi shook her head. I cannot say yet, but the consulting firm has no employees, no website, and no client list. A shell company. I stared at the ledger again. If Grant knew about the stolen funds, then his performance at the engagement dinner had been theater. But if he did not know, then Piper had been paying him secretly for something else. Naomi tapped the screen again. There is more. She opened a communication log retrieved from Piper's business email. One thread included messages between Piper and a contact saved only as M. Hale. My heart skipped. Martin Hale. But the message address was not Martin's. The sender domain was haleconsultgroup.net, not Martin's legal office. A different Hale. The message content revealed everything. Piper had hired a consultant months earlier to help restructure her business accounts after the first estate withdrawal. The consultant advised her on how to move funds between accounts to avoid triggering automatic bank alerts. The instructions were precise, too precise. And in the final email exchange, the consultant warned Piper about one specific risk. Ensure the beneficiary whose identity is attached to the estate accounts never reviews the statements directly. I laughed softly. That advice aged poorly. Naomi smiled. Very. But the final detail was the most devastating. The consultant's last invoice included a phone number. Naomi had called it earlier that morning. The number connected to a financial restructuring advisor currently under investigation for assisting clients in concealment schemes. He had already been cooperating with authorities, and he had recognized Piper's name immediately, which meant something important. If the consultant confirmed Piper knowingly concealed stolen estate funds, then the witness signature Derek provided no longer mattered. Because intentional fraud overrides mistaken authorization, within 2 days, Martin arranged a formal statement from the consultant. The evidence chain tightened again, and one more person stepped forward unexpectedly. Grant. He requested a meeting. We met in Martin's office on a gray afternoon that smelled faintly of rain. Grant looked different without the polished calm he wore during the engagement dinner. I need to clarify something, he said. He explained that Piper had insisted on paying him consulting fees for helping with marketing strategies for her event business. He believed the money came from legitimate business revenue. He had not known about the estate theft. But once Naomi contacted him about the payments, he reviewed his records. Then he found something else. Emails from Piper asking him to create a shell consulting invoice structure that would justify irregular transfers. He refused at the time, but he had kept the messages. Grant placed printed copies on Martin's desk. Use them, he said quietly. The room fell silent. In that moment, I realized something strange. The alliance network I thought had collapsed was quietly rebuilding itself. Naomi, Martin, Grant, even Derek, who had called again to offer testimony, admitting he signed the declaration without understanding the context. Truth attracts witnesses eventually, even if it takes time. 2 weeks later, the fraud case resumed with stronger evidence than before. The consultant's statement confirmed intentional concealment. Grant's emails confirmed Piper's knowledge of financial irregularities. The estate attorney formally rejected the forged surrender letter. The bank completed its internal review, and the prosecutor assigned to the Financial Crimes Unit accepted the case. For the first time since the engagement dinner, the outcome was no longer uncertain. because the truth had finally become impossible to ignore, and this time it was documented from every direction. The final hearing took place 6 months after the engagement dinner. By then, the story had already changed my life in ways I never expected. The investigation confirmed the estate withdrawals totaled nearly $300,000 once every hidden transfer was included. The forged declaration, the false medical emergency request, and the attempted property collateral submission created multiple criminal charges. Piper faced fraud and financial misrepresentation. My mother faced charges for submitting falsified supporting documents. My father avoided direct charges but received a formal warning for knowingly forwarding payment notices connected to fraudulent accounts. The courtroom felt nothing like the dramatic scenes people imagine. It was quiet, procedural, almost boring. But the truth unfolded piece by piece with a calm certainty that made every denial sound smaller. Piper cried during testimony. She claimed pressure. She claimed confusion. She claimed she believed family money was flexible. But the consultant's statement destroyed that argument. Grant's emails confirmed she understood the financial risk. And Naomi's tracing analysis proved the concealment strategy had been deliberate. The court ordered full restitution. Every stolen dollar had to be repaid. Piper also received a suspended sentence with mandatory financial monitoring. My mother paid significant penalties and lost access to the estate oversight privileges she once held. But the most profound consequence was quieter. The family narrative finally collapsed. Relatives who once believed my mother's stories about my dramatic personality now saw the evidence themselves. Invitations to family gatherings stopped arriving. My parents stopped calling, except through lawyers. The strange thing was that I did not feel victorious. I felt clear. The clarity came from something simple. For the first time in my life, my value had not depended on their approval. The legal process ended the financial damage, but the emotional rebuilding happened somewhere else. With people who chose honesty instead of loyalty theater, Naomi became a close friend after months of working together. Derek apologized again and eventually earned back a cautious place in my life through consistency rather than promises. Grant moved away after dissolving Piper's business connections, but he sent a short message one day. "You did the right thing." The chosen family I built afterward looked nothing like the one I was born into. It was quieter, kinder, and far less interested in pretending things were fine when they were not. One evening, nearly a year after the engagement dinner, I finally lit the gardenia candle. The scent filled my living room slowly. My grandmother used to say that truth behaves like fragrance. At first it is subtle, then it becomes impossible to ignore. And when it spreads, it changes the entire room. Before I end this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been this person in a family who saw the truth before everyone else did? The one who was called difficult simply for refusing to ignore what was happening? If that has ever been your experience, share it in the comments. Your story might help someone else realize they are not alone. If you found something meaningful in this story about justice consequences and the strange way karma sometimes arrives disguised as paperwork, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so more people can hear stories like this. You can also share this with someone who needs the reminder that protecting your dignity is never selfish. Thank you for listening to my story. And wherever you are watching from tonight, I hope your life is filled with people who value honesty more than appearances. Because the family you choose will always matter more than the one that tried to silence you. Part 5. 3 weeks after the engagement dinner, I learned something that nearly collapsed everything I had built. The call came from Naomi Brooks. Her voice was cautious. "Elena," she said, "we need to discuss one more layer of the financial trail." My stomach tightened. "What layer?" "There is a payment authorization attached to the original estate withdrawal." I frowned. "That authorization was forged." "Yes," she said carefully. "But the document contains a witness signature." My chest felt suddenly hollow. "What witness?" There was a pause. "Your friend." The word landed like a stone. "Which friend?" I asked slowly. Naomi answered. "Derek." For a moment I did not understand. Derek Sullivan had been one of the only people outside my work life who knew the entire situation. He had been my closest friend for nearly 8 years. We met through a volunteer financial literacy program and stayed in touch long after the program ended. When the fraud investigation began, he was the person who listened when I needed to talk without feeling judged. He had also helped me gather some of the documentation before the dinner. "Show me the file," I said quietly. Naomi emailed it within minutes. The scanned page appeared on my screen. "Witness verification, Derek Sullivan." My hands went cold. The signature looked real. Too real. I called him immediately. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said warmly. How are you holding up? I skipped the greeting. Did you sign a document connected to my grandmother's estate? Silence. Then Derek exhaled slowly. Elena. That was when I knew. Yes or no, I said. Yes. The word felt like the floor had tilted under my chair. Why? I thought it was authorization paperwork, he said quickly. Your mother told me you had already agreed. I closed my eyes. You did not ask me. She said you were overwhelmed and needed help processing it. I pressed my hand against my forehead. Derek continued speaking faster now. Elena, it was months ago. I did not know what it was tied to. Did you read it? I skimmed it. The anger arrived slowly. You witnessed a financial declaration involving my inheritance without confirming it with me. I trusted your family. The irony nearly made me laugh. So did I said quietly. Derek tried to explain. He said my mother had called him after finding his number in an old contact list. She told him I was handling estate restructuring and needed a witness signature to finalize the transfer quickly. She framed it as administrative inconvenience. He believed her. And because Derek believed her, the forged declaration gained legitimacy long enough for the bank clerk to process the first withdrawal. I never imagined they would do something like this, he said. Neither had he imagined the damage. The investigation now included him as a potential facilitator. Not criminally responsible, perhaps, but involved. For the first time since the dinner, I felt something close to defeat. The case had been clean. Now it was messy. Emotionally messy. Legally complicated. When I hung up the phone, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time staring at the same gardenia candle I had never lit. Trust, I realized, is not destroyed only by enemies. Sometimes it collapses under the weight of good intentions. But Derek's mistake created an opening my family immediately tried to exploit. Within days, their attorney contacted Martin with a new argument. If a neutral witness verified the authorization they claimed, then the withdrawal had been legitimate at the time. It was not a strong argument, but it was enough to slow the process. For the first time since confronting them, I felt like the ground beneath the case had shifted. The truth was still on my side, but the clarity had blurred, and my family knew it. My mother called 2 days later. Her voice sounded almost sympathetic. You see how complicated things become when accusations start flying, she said. I did not answer. You should let this go, she continued softly. Families survive mistakes by forgiving them. Forgiving them. The word echoed like an insult. I finally spoke. You forged my signature. You have Derek's signature, she replied calmly. The call ended soon after. For the first time since the engagement dinner, I wondered if exposing them had actually strengthened their defense. Because betrayal inside the alliance network hurts more than opposition outside it. But the story was not finished. Because the same mistake that weakened my case also revealed something else. A detail nobody had noticed yet, and that detail would change everything.